Right, let's take a look at Churchill. This is Mark Herman's new game for this year. Now, for one thing, you might ask yourself, dude, Mark Herman did in a tutorial for the game on video. How are you going to improve on that? Well, look, my rules introductions are always, I believe, a last gasp for anyone who's looking for a way to understand the rules. This is not, I'm going to go into the rules because it serves as a reminder to myself. I've played it once with Mark and his son and son-in-law at Consim World, and just the tournament scenario. And then since then I've read the rules and then did a few other things and kind of forgot them over a course of about 2 weeks. So that's one of the problems that you're gonna face with anything that I look at, is you're catching me struggling through the rules, and that may give you some sort of insight you don't get otherwise. I'm not going to back away from it this time, both because I need the refresher, and this gives me a framework to look at the rules again, and because I think there are some people who actually kind of like this take. Among other things, I'm not always just explaining the rules. I go through and I say, well, that seems kind of weird, about certain things. So anyway, my experience with this, like I said, there were, let me give the whole history. There were 3 games that came out this year, or within a couple of years ago, in terms of being P500s from GMT, all on World War II. This one, Triumph and Tragedy, which, I don't know where I've put it. It's got to be over there somewhere. There it is. And Cataclysm. And all of them seem to give, a different view of World War II from what we've been seeing. Before I was looking at the Unconditional Surrender, Supreme Commander, and maybe A World at War all being up there at once. Well, now I'm seeing 3 games that all look like they're taking a very different, much higher level, more political look at the war. Now, we've already looked at Triumph and Tragedy, and I think it's pretty kick-ass, actually. Cataclysm is the one that I P500 because, well, for a few reasons. One is, it's the one that I didn't think, that looked the most interesting to me. There's no question there. But it's also, turns out, the one that was the least likely to make the cut. I was pretty sure Churchill would make it. I didn't know Triumph and Tragedy. I actually wasn't even sure that it was a block game until later. Every time I saw that, I would say, oh geez, I don't want it, it's a block game. But it's a cool game, and I'm not sure why it's a block game particularly, but anyway, 3 of them coming out at the same time, all in, what seemed like similar space. Now, this was the one the more different from the other 2, and you can see, wow, this doesn't even have a map with pieces on it or anything like that. It's not gonna be combat in the normal way, and I knew that, because this one focuses on the conferences themselves, which I think is a pretty cool take on things. And I was tempted to go with this and Cataclysm, but I said, within a couple of days, this reached its P500, and I said to myself, well, it's a good fall sale purchase. Well, that wasn't a great idea, because it's gotten enough fanfare, enough hype about it, probably deserve it, but we'll see, that it pretty much sold out, and it wasn't available in the fall sale. And I had already decided after playing it that, I am going to pick it up in the fall sale. It is worthwhile for that. Or maybe if I can hold off, I'll wait a couple of years and maybe it'll be cheaper. But no real assurance that it would be. It might be one of those games that just holds its price for, until the reprint. So, you know, I was still trying to hedge my bets, and ended up seeing it at I don't remember where. There was a Cool Stuff Incorporated sale, and I ended up buying it there. I think that was where I got it from. Yeah. And it was actually after I got Triumph and Tragedy, and I would have been better off buying the two together. But in a sense, Triumph and Tragedy is why I bought this, why I was more receptive to picking this up. Is I picked up Triumph and Tragedy, played it, and said, you know, if I can solo this and have fun, I know this game already, I know I can solo it and have a good time with it. And I'm just, you know, dragging my feet on this, and I should have just pulled the trigger earlier. Anyway. A lot of words for nothing, right? Because I'm trying to avoid getting to the rules themselves. Let's see what we've got on the board. So we got a victory point track. I'm not quite sure what I put there. I got some extra pieces that I could put up there, but nothing that seems appropriate. In particular, I've got an extra. So this is one of the things. GMT with block games gives you a handful of extra pieces of wood. And here I've got, you know, an extra blue U.S. atomic bomb piece and an extra red atomic bomb piece. But I don't have enough to score as victory points. I have like, you know, one extra big block and one extra small block for each person. These smaller little cylinders, there's 15 of them in the game, but I've got only one extra for each. There actually was a misprint or something. In general, they give you one extra piece of everything that you might need, which is cool. But I got one too few piece for the navies. So I'm using a Japanese infantry over in Germany as a navy. We'll see how that works out. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to use for the victory point marker here. My guess is I can probably get away with these. But I'm not sure that that's what I'm supposed to do. Let's take a look at see, now every time he shows a picture of the map, he does not show the victory point track. And I don't remember from my play what we used on it. But yeah, I'm just not sure what's supposed to go there. All right. The main part of the board, this is the conference table itself, and they take a big circular table because at least some of the conferences were done at big circular tables with all the staff around them. You have a set of conference issues that the different world leaders can bring up for debate. You have this Paul Mill table. This is sort of a random events table that indicates where some stuff is going to happen over here on the more military and tactical side. Well, not really tactical, but the more military side of the board. The table is broken into 3 tracks, which are going to be how much influence you have over a given issue. And if you move an issue all the way from the middle of the table, where they kind of start out usually, into your chair, you've captured that issue for that conference, and no one can budge it from you. You also have these relationship spaces between the two different, between each pair of powers. So the U.S. and the USSR are debating between United Nations and communist cadres. And one of the issues, the global issue, allows you to move those around a little bit. There might be other things, we'll see in a bit. These are the conferences themselves. And there's 10 conferences. Each one has 3 options, and they're going to have a series of different event-like things that happen here. Some of them may be, you know, requirements for attacks and stuff like that. Over here, you have a bunch of tracks that you're going to move along as you're defeating the Axis. The Axis is not played in this game. It's a 3-player game, and there's bots available, but we won't be doing that in my play, of course. There are other people who are playing the solitaire game with bots, so you'll get a few of that. Between the US, the UK, and the USSR, in terms of how they're going to carve out the post-war world. Now, it's possible that you won't take out the Axis, and honestly, I have a fear that that's actually pretty likely for various reasons. The game that I played at the convention now, I didn't know what I was doing at all. Mark gave a pretty good explanation of the rules, and my little brain didn't handle it terribly well. But what I compiled from it was, well, if I can't come in first, I better come in second and kick the guy who's been, kick somebody else beneath me hard, that doesn't work in all cases, but that was my overall strategy as it started to, early on I tried to do well, and I was doing fine, but I wasn't building up strategically for the end game. And then boom, it all collapsed on me, and it looked like, well, I'm either in second or third place. Oh wait, there's this rule where if you're far enough behind, if the last place player is far enough behind, the second place player wins. Whatever, I'll try for that. Yeah, it's not as clear cut as that. Anyway, there's these tracks that you follow that cover various areas that you're going to take on your way to taking out the final victory against one of the Axis powers. And then there's these countries that are behind the lines on these, and as you cross the line on them, you shift the control on them, especially I think the insurgency forces and such not. Okay. Clandestine networks. Okay. Well, each player also has a deck of staff. And these are going to be kind of like CDG cards. They have a value that they use for debating the issues, and then they might have some special ability. Unlike in a CDG, though, you sort of get both. You get the value no matter what for what you're trying to do, and if you're using the right issue. So for example, if this guy's working against a political military issue, he gets a bonus in his value. So the cards are somewhat less flexible, at least that one. But this one, let's see if we've got one that, most of these just add to their strength, but some of them, if played on a directed offensive, place an offensive support marker on the Eastern Front. He gets additional military focus just by aiming for a certain kind of issue. We got a bunch of counters here that are used for different things. Every time you win a conference, you get these. They mark your victory points just so that you have a check for them. These are going to be your naval support markers. Some of them are already out. Obviously, they're more important in the Pacific, but we got them in the Mediterranean. There's a Navy down there. Offensive support markers are going to help you move forward on these tracks. These are little bonuses that you get when you take out Germany. The different players get little victory point bonuses, and if only one person goes in Germany, they get to capture them all, so that's kind of a big deal. These, I guess, are used to mark who commands a given theater. Got a number of these here, so I think there's two ways to handle this. So I've got this little wooden block of Roosevelt, and I've got this marker that says he's active or inactive. And they're kind of both serving the same purpose. I lay the block down if he's inactive, or I flip the counter over. There's, a surplus of pieces to this game in case you have different ways, like if you don't want a wooden block on the board for some reason. I'm not sure why. These are going to be production. Each country has its own production available, and it might get assigned to other people. In particular, the US and British production are issues which can be assigned, as lend-lease or whatever, in terms of, but if the country gets to control its own production, well, it gets to use it for its own desires instead. These markers are going to be your political control markers. When you take minor countries and you grab political control over them, you mark them with this. These are your clandestine networks. You need a few more of them. They're used the same way on the minor countries, and they help you set up your political control there and dismantle other people's. Let's grab the sequence of play here. Also, they give you a bunch of dice. A 10-sider, and then 6-siders for each of the powers. It is kind of odd. I know a couple of my buddies over on the Game Box are upset about the fact that Britain is green and the US is blue. They feel like that's kind of an inversion of the colors they should be. Yeah, I guess I can get used to it though. Okay, so each of the main characters has special abilities associated with them, which they can trigger. I can go over those quickly. So Churchill, he's allowed to drive the agenda better by adding a point on his bid for which issue is going to open things up, basically. Roosevelt wins any tiebreakers that aren't otherwise handled. And then the USSR can add a bonus to his debate value, which is a way of preventing issues from going forward. Okay. So let's take a look at the conference. So the base, and like I said, there's bots that'll run each of the countries. There's a base sequence of things you go through, and you start over with the conference. You figure out what the agenda is. Now, the way you figure out the agenda, and I wish I had played this more recently because I would remember it better instead of having to read it, basically. Is first you deal out 7 of these staff cards. Basically, every other, you have 21 cards to begin with. Some of them will die over the course of the game, people getting old or whatever. 21 cards, and every other turn you reshuffle. So you will not be guaranteed to go through your whole deck each time. Then each player puts one of their staff cards, and that will not be Roosevelt or Churchill or Stalin, face down. You flip them over, the UK gets +1 to its staff value, and the high-valued card gets to grab any of these issues that they wish and put it on their track on a space that corresponds to the difference between the winning card and the lowest card played by the other players. So if you play a low card, you know you're giving whoever plays the highest valued card a big jump on the track, for better or worse, on one issue. Probably the one they care the most about. Then we go to the meeting segment, and this is really the game. So the person who won the agenda and picked one item, well, the next person to his left gets to play one of his staff card. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't pick the rest of the agenda. All right, after the first player picks the first agenda card piece, each player in turn, starting to the left of the player who won the agenda, picks 2 of the issues and puts them in the center of the conference table. So the guy who won it gets the first one with a bonus, and then gets to scoop up the last 2, gets to make the last choice, the most informed choice of all. which is a pretty potent bonus. Okay. During the meeting segment, each player, in turn, is going to be playing one of their cards, in general, to move one of the issues that's on the board a number of spaces equal to the card's value. And the value might be increased by an attribute. That's the basic flow. And you want to get things over on your side of the track so that you win the issues and get control of them. To some extent. Some issues you may want to keep in the center. Okay. Whenever you move an issue, each player in turn gets an option to debate what you just did. And debating what you just did means they jump in, play a card, and immediately counter move it. And if they debate, they get one of these debate pass markers, which means on their next turn, in order to hang on to cards, they can play that instead of playing a card. You can't build up more than one debate pass. Okay. After the meeting segment, each player counts the number of issues they have on their side of the track, including ones that they have on the chair. Whoever gets the most wins one of these, which is worth victory points. Then we have to deal with some of the issues: directed offensives, conditional issues, production, theater leadership, A-bomb research, global issues. Each of those gets resolved after the conference has completed, after the card play part. Now, I want to hit some specifics in here. The first thing you do in the conference, first of all, is you flip one of these over and take the events. And there's going to be one from each conference there. There's 10 different conferences. There's a couple of things over here in the meeting segment I wanted to talk about. Just some specifics on debating. Stalin is used to advance an A-bomb research issue. The issue can't be debated. Each side has a chief of staff card who basically rolls a die to see how good he is on any given issue. If you wish, you can use your primary leader for something. And there's always a cost to doing this. For example, with Roosevelt, he has to roll to see if he dies. And you do this by discarding a normal staff card, so you still get the 7 turns. And then you play the more powerful version of your leader for that. You can't do that if your leader's inactive. And you can do that for either advancing or debating an issue. If you advance an issue with your main leader, it can't be debated by anyone except the main leader of the other player. Which means if they've already used their main leader, or if their main leader's not present, if he's inactive at the conference, you can guarantee that you move that issue without debate. Okay, I'm going to take a little pause here because I'm going to need one anyway, as we go to dealing with the decision segment, which is when you place the chips, when you take the effects of the conference into consideration. Okay, so the decision segment. And what's really nice about this is really key. Sequence of play, you may have seen me do this in a few of the more recent complicated games. Sequence of play links right into the rules description by a reference number in every single case. That's just brilliant. I mean, you know, I guess a lot of us do this on our own, but it's nice to see it translating into the rules formats here. I had a talk with Mark about the wonderful quality of the rules of Victor Games. Apparently, that wasn't his doing directly, at least. They had a guy who just was really awesome at editing and formatting the rules for him. I don't remember his name. I wish I was more of a prepared and qualified person, because I would love to give this guy a shout out, because it just almost everyone agrees that Victory Games rulebooks, about 80% of them are just top of the class out of anything that's ever been produced. Anyway, and I always blamed Mark for it, but he's at least willing, convinced to share the credit, if not actually foist it all on someone else, which I think is actually the case. But what he's doing, I think he deserves some of it, I'm sure. Because you look at this, Okay, so the decision segment, let's see, directed offensive placement. So anybody who won an issue that's a directed offensive, and that's basically what you're going to be doing here. You're going to be resolving these issues as to what's going to, how they're going to apply to the battles and to the, to the actual map. So he must place this issue on a front, and what that's going to do is that's going to force certain amount of production to move into that front. Conditional issues, the second front, and the USSR declares war on Japan. These are required to start moving forward here or here. And they're a specific special case. If they end up on one side of the table or another, anywhere on somebody's track, yeah, they count towards winning the condition, but they don't trigger. The only way these things are triggered is if they end up exactly in the center of the table. Which means if you want this thing, say if you're Russia asking for a second front, or if you're the US asking for Russia to declare war on Japan, if you get it going in your direction, you probably want to stop it at the center of the table, and you're allowed to do that on these particular issues only, I believe. So you might actually have a question in your own head, well, do I want the cheap victory points, or do I need to assure that activity? Production. Okay. Each player gets his production markers, plus bonuses that may come out from here. But also they get points for production issues. They get to take other people's points. So like if a U.S. production issue is over on the USSR's track, the U.S. has to hand one of his production markers to the USSR. And then there'll be also bonuses for the Arctic Theater and the Strategic Materials issue. Strategic Materials, I believe, I'm not seeing it. There it is. Strategic Materials, I believe, gives you a bonus of your own country's production, if that issue gets won. It doesn't take something from someone. Then each player allocates his own production, and he has to place where there are directed fronts, etc. Once these mandatory requirements have been fulfilled, if you have any remaining production markers, you can allocate them to any political military events that you've captured. One production activates one of those. To A-bomb research that you've got, or to just purchasing offensive support and naval support markers, which you'll place on the board. You may never decline to use an available production marker or command bonus, and you must allocate the production markers until they're all used. Okay. Whoever has the theater leadership. So these are issues that come up, and then there's also the theater leadership here. If you have the issue, you get an offensive or naval support. If both of them were in the conference, the players who win these issues get 2 bonus offensives or naval support and determine whether the US or UK will command that theater. No. Okay, so you get a support marker and you get to choose which country commands the theater. in each case. Right. So you get the bonus if you have the theater command. If the issue comes up, you get double the bonus and the right to change the theater command. If the A-bomb research issue was included in the conference, the player who won the issue rolls a 6-sided die, and this will be modified by production points allocated to determine whether or not the U.S. A-bomb pawn is moved forward. And I think it's a 50-50 chance base. Doesn't say here that I see. There's a lot of writing on the map. That's something I'm always iffy about. Yeah, look, it saves a lot of space, gives you a player aid where you can easily see it, but honestly, sometimes it's hard to find, hard to see within the clutter of the map. If Stalin won the issue, they also get to move the Soviet pawn a space forward automatically. If the global issue came up and somebody won it, they get to move one of these into their favored position. If everything's in the favored position, they get to leave them where they are. And these will have different effects. They count as victory points if they're towards you, and they also have effects which may not help you as much as you think they might. Okay. Then we go to the war phase here, where you're going to start with the player who has the most clandestine networks. That's these things. You get assigned some of these, and you'll also get some by triggering these. Clandestines will be the second number over here. It's political alignment clandestine networks. Okay. You're allowed to place these at once. You get one automatically. You get them from the conference leader and staff cards. So they can be generated just, out of the cards you play, etc. And then also if you allocate production to political military, you get points for those. And those tend to be pretty good. You place clandestine networks in a country which has no networks belonging to other players, or you expend them one for one to knock other players out of spaces. And you're limited to, I believe, 2 of these in any one country. And obviously only one player can be in any given country. And you start with whoever has the most of them, and they play all theirs at first, I believe. Yeah. Then you go to the political segment where you're going to put your political control markers. The person who has the most, again, goes first. And you gain these possibly from conference, leader, and staff cards again, and again through allocating production to these. They can be placed in countries with no political markers belonging to other players, or expended on a one-for-one basis to knock other people out. You're only allowed one of these. In order to either place or remove a political alignment, though, you have to have the clandestine networks in that country. And the global positioning may cause you to not be able to place everywhere. So sort of the global positioning is kind of the agreement on what the final world is going to look like from a very high level. So like the United Nations, it costs 2 political alignment markers to remove an opponent's political alignment marker, which is to say we want things to be a little bit more stable. Whereas communist cadres, it costs 2 political alignment markers to remove a Soviet political marker in a series of countries that are seen as the Soviet sphere. It costs 1 to remove an opponent's marker in all other situations. If we go look at Churchill, and the British Russian combine, the USSR can only place or remove alignment markers in a certain set of states, and the UK and US in another. Only the USSR can go in certain states. Only the UK and US can go in other states. And that kind of says we're carving up the, this is the naughty note, right? We're carving up the post-war world. Whereas if it's pro-British, all players can place political alignment markers in any country without any restriction. And then over here, we have the choice between self-determination and colonialism. All players can place them in colonies without restriction, to only the UK can place them in colonies. Now this is kind of interesting because spheres of influence, you know, Churchill doesn't care that much about, or the Brits probably don't care that much about that, although by having them, they're going to be competing directly with the US on more countries and less with the Russians, and they kind of give the Russians their carve-out. Whereas colonialism says, hey, nobody is going into my former colonies. And those aren't just British colonies, they include the French colonies, for example, here. And you have spaces here. So, for example, Pacific colonies are the dark blue. Regular Pacific spaces are blue, European spaces, and European countries. So the spaces are the tracks, but these are colonies and they're going to be restricted. Likewise, there's restrictions, though, based on location, which we'll look at in a little bit. Now, it's possible you could be in a position where you have clandestine networks that you've put into a country somebody else controls and you haven't knocked out their political control yet. So the military segment is going to be divided into an Axis reserve deployment and then the front advancement. The Axis reserve deployment is going to follow a mechanical pattern to decide, hey, where do we put the, German army? And maybe here. Where do we put the Italians? Are there any Germans there? And we can go over what the numbers are for that and then the naval allocations. And then after those are placed, then each front must attempt to advance if it's allowed to. So for example, you'd be rolling dice to see if you go forward a space on that track. And we'll go again into some of the mechanisms in a little bit more detail. Okay. Some core things I ought to go to before we go into the details. Winning the game. Okay, so if both the Axis powers have surrendered and there's a 15-point or less span between the winner and the lowest scored player, then the person who has the winning score wins the game. The higher score wins the game. If the Axis powers have surrendered and the point spread is greater than 15 points, then you're going to roll a die, add that to the point spread, and if it's still greater than that point spread, then the second place player wins the game. However, things get really crazy, and in tournament they make it to the fixed 15 points, which is what we would have had. Supposedly, I thought we were playing the tournament game, and then, well, when we actually figured it out, the dice were rolled. Well, it may have been here. So condition 3 is, yeah, no, we did condition 3, so we didn't withdraw the tournament at a late point. If either the Axis power has not surrendered, well, neither one had surrendered in our game, the player with the highest score subtracts a die roll from their score. The second highest score subtracts half a die roll, and the lowest score adds a die roll. And whoever gets the highest total wins. And this is to sort of show that things would be very chaotic in a situation where an unconditional surrender was not demanded from both Germany and Japan, where either one of them might have been able to stick around and been a key player in the post-war period long before they, historically were able to make it up there. If there's some sort of tie in the most victory points, then the final game tiebreaker goes as follows. If the U.S. Hold on. Okay, so if the U.S. is tied for the lead and has the A-bomb, they win. If the USSR is tied for the lead and its East Front tank marker is the only occupier of Germany, they win. Otherwise, Churchill wins. Even if Churchill wasn't in the tie for the lead. It's unexpected package time. In general, there are tiebreakers which are handled in different ways. So you're allowed to break a tie using your active leader, starting with Stalin. This is a permanent, you expend your leader and you win that tie. During the agenda segment, whoever commits first wins the tie. During the decision segment, if two or more players have the same number of issues, starting with Stalin going around, they can decide to fire off their leader to break the tie. The leader has to be uncommitted. And then finally, if no one uses their leader to break the tie, the U.S. automatically gets to break the tie, and they get to decide whichever way they want to go. Even if they're not involved in it, they get to. They try to put a time limit on people's thinking. 5 Mississippi rule. Negotiation. There's no built-in walk away from the table and talk, but regular table talk is supposed to be expected here. Obviously, you could play under different forms, but that's fine. And there's no binding negotiations or anything like that. All right, we're going to look for specifics that we want to talk about, but I think we've given a pretty high-level overview here. Of course, this video isn't long enough yet for, my standard long-windedness. And now it's time to pick up the pieces and look through. I looked through the meeting segment, the agenda segment. I think I've actually got these pretty well covered with my ideas that I presented already. Yeah, there's some special cases, but we'll not worry too much about them. Although it may be a danger if I forget things, so I always screw games up though. Okay, what about directed offensives? Okay, that's going to go to the allocation of production, which I mentioned. Conditional issues, we've already kind of talked about these. Now, a conditional issue has an interesting possibility, though. You might be required to start that new front, but it might not be very well supported, and you might not push very far. You might not succeed in moving your token forward, in which case the conditional issue has to be restarted. If you don't make it out of the box, if you don't make it, into the United Kingdom, if you don't make it you'd have a declaration of war against Japan with no real activity, which would mean you'd have to restart that issue again. Same thing with trying to push units forward for that second front. You'd have to restart the issue to get there. And to do that, you'd have to put it back in the conference. Once the conditional issue has been successfully completed on the map, though, it goes away and it's no longer something up for debate. So you can't just put, nonsensical stuff up for debate. You can do that in some games. It's kind of interesting, You pass a resolution, it has really no meaning, except that it actually can affect the score of the game. It's kind of weird stuff. I'm trying to remember what game has that, but okay. Your production, you're going to get a certain amount of chips. If the strategic materials went to someone, they get their chip for that. If the Arctic theater has 3 or more naval markers in it, then that opens up Norway and Finland for activity, but it also gives the Arctic production marker, which you're going to find. This is it. But somebody's going to have to commit their navy, the West, primarily. The USSR can also get a Murmansk convoy due to the card plays. Otherwise, production allocation is going to be pretty much at the choice of the players. They have to first follow anything on the conference card, and then they have to follow directed offensives, which are going to require 2 production markers each to satisfy. And then after you do this, you're allowed to allocate them where you like to place offensive support and naval support markers. You might also get some additional bonus markers. A theater box can never have more than 5 naval markers total. A land or amphibious entry can have an unlimited number of offensive support markers in it. Some conference cards require you to do certain things. Some directed offensives can be placed in an entry space to ensure that it receives its offensive priority. Each directed offensive requires the flag owner to allocate production markers. Now, I believe you're allowed to put these wherever you like. So, for example, you could put a USSR offensive on a U.S. front, like over here in the Marshalls or something. That's just, it's not indicating that the Russians are really doing anything. It's indicating that they're not having as great a demand on the normal Lend-Lease process that's in play. You also have to spend a production to activate these. Now, if you buy these things, you probably want to activate them if you win them in the conference. They're pretty good ways of generating victory points. They help set up your post-war situation. So usually you don't let those go by. Theater leadership. So whoever controls the leadership gets a marker. But this is independent of winning the theater leadership issue. The player who won a theater leadership issue gets 2 additional offensive support markers or naval support. So I was mistaken. I thought there were just 2 total at risk. And they also get to decide who the theater leader is. Now, what's this? The player who won determines whether that, and 2 offensive support issues. And if you win both of them in the same conference, you get an extra 2 offensive support markers that you can use in either of the theaters. The USSR cannot command the theaters, but they can win the issue and gain the bonus offensive and naval support markers, and the right to choose who is going to be in command in the theater. And this doesn't indicate some kind of additional production. It just indicates coordination facets of the resources that are present. The one thing is, if these issues don't come up, you're not putting as big a pressure on winning that theater. You're allowing the theater to kind of stagnate, which of course keeps your control of the theater locked in a little better, but it may make it harder for you to actually win in that theater. The A-bomb research, okay. You roll a die on a 4 through 6, it'll advance for the U.S. Once the U.S. enters the final space, the U.S. and U.K. will have the A-bomb, and this will affect Japanese surrender and victory points. If Stalin wins an issue, he automatically moves the Russian marker forward in addition to the chance of the U.S. marker going forward. Each production marker gives you a +1. There doesn't seem to be a limitation to that, so you might be able to ensure that you push atomic bomb forward. Not a big deal there. This isn't going to be, like playing a World at War where, if I throw everything in, it might, it's not meant to be a simulation of the process where this is a technological feat that maybe isn't possible. It's at such a high level that, you know, you throw enough resources in, you get it, man. Okay, each player has 2 global issues, and we talked about these a little bit as to how they link up, and I think in more detail than I want to go through any, well, in enough detail I don't want to go any further. We talked a little bit about the war phase, where you start placing these chips and then these. And again, they're going to affect your victory points at the end of the game. We've got a whole victory point schedule here in the play aid. That's a big deal. The end game is here. And then, of course, the bots are all listed. So each player's play aid has all the bots. This is useful. You know, if you're playing a 3-player game, how many play aids do they have? Yeah. If you're playing a 3-player game, you don't have a bot, so you don't really need one. So maybe they didn't have to produce them all exactly the same. If you're playing, though, a 2-player game, each person kind of needs a copy of the other player's bot. And then if you're playing solo, well, maybe you want to have it open to different pages. Right? Okay. The Arctic Theater. This is a special situation. This isn't like a normal front. You're not going to be marching troops through here. Players can place naval support markers there, nothing else. And no political markers or clandestine networks can be placed there unless you meet the naval support requirement of 3. They stay there if the naval support's not present. This is going to be a tough thing to do. It's basically something you do if you want to give some support to the Russians. And they might be able to use production support to push counters out there. Okay, the fronts themselves. So the goal on these is you're going to be facing some enemy counters. And your goal is to be stronger than them and be able to move spaces forward. So at the beginning of this war phase, or during this war phase, you roll to see where the Axis forces go. And first, the Germans. The Germans have 6 German armies available, 1 Italian army, and 1 navy, which should be the U-boats. The Japanese, and I'm going to use a Japanese yellow piece because unfortunately my game did not come with enough gray cubes. For whatever reason, like I said, they came with a spare on everything else. I could repaint a cube, but whatever. The Japanese have 2 gray navies available. All the Axis reserves start off in the spaces that they're supposed to go to, Japan or Germany to begin with, and then we have to decide where they end up on the front tracks. And this is going to follow a certain policy that goes. So if any front is attempting to enter Germany, there are going to be 2 German armies allocated to defend Germany. If not, we skip that one. Then we place a German army in the Soviet Eastern Front's entry space, which may be Germany, wherever the Soviets are moving into next. If both Western and Eastern fronts are positioned to enter Germany, position this army to indicate that it's going to be on the Eastern Front. So, if I had 2 in Germany, then I would put another one here in Germany. But assuming we're at kind of the starting place in the game, hey, this just goes out here. Then we do the Battle of the Atlantic. If the U.S. front marker has not exited the Western Theater, the German Navy Reserve goes in the Western Theater. All right. And it kills 1 naval support marker that's there. Then the Eastern Horde. If the U.S. front has not exited UK Bolero, 4 German armies go over to the Russian front. We're really worried. There's no threat there. Atlantic Wall, if the Western Front is in the UK Bolero space, a unit goes into Normandy. And so on and so on. The Italians go in the Mediterranean front, etc. And then there's a repositioning that's kind of at random. But you can see the bulk of the army is going to be, for the Germans, is going to be out in the East Front. Now, it's possible that German units start being destroyed. The Pacific, we've got the Pacific naval units. If the IJN is placed, then it'll sink U.S. naval support, and it has a chance of being destroyed in doing so. Okay. But then what you eventually do is you compare the advancement of the front. And for a front to advance, the marker has a base strength of 2. If there's fewer than 3 naval markers in a theater box, 5 in Normandy, and it's attempting to advance into an amphibious entry space, it fails. So I got to get some naval support to make it into Bolero. Each military offensive support marker being used, I'll add 2 to the front strength. Each Axis reserve subtracts 2. If multiple fronts are trying to go into Germany or Japan, you split the forces defending that aren't allocated, and you roll a die. If you roll greater than the modified strength of the front, you don't go forward. If you roll equal to or less, you go forward 1 space in general. But if okay, let's see. So in order to advance into Normandy, you can push forward into UK Bolero. You can't make it to Normandy. In order to push to Normandy, you have to have the second front in the center of the table. Not just an issue, but one that got pushed forward. Same thing with the Soviet Far East Front. It can't move into Nomonhan, I believe. May not advance into the Manchuria space. No, you can make it to Nomonhan. You can't make it into Manchuria without declaring war on the Japanese. Once you break through Manchuria or Normandy, well, then the front's opened, and that shit no longer is an issue that can ever be raised at the table again. Now, it is possible for a front to have a strength of 10 or higher, in which case, if the advanced die roll is a modified 10 or higher, a breakthrough occurs. Well, you don't modify the die roll, right? Yeah, you do. You add 1 for each point above 10 that the front's total strength ends up as. So you end up with some chance of moving forward 2 spaces from that. Eventually, the Axis will surrender. Germany surrenders when Germany's captured, and at that point, these markers get split between the people who made it. The US and UK get 1 each for coming in from the west. If only Russia goes into Germany, they get all 3. Otherwise, if everybody goes in at the same time, they split them evenly. So Japan has special surrender conditions. First of all, if you go into Japan, you end them. However, if you don't do that, there's 3 surrender conditions. Germany has to have surrendered, and it could be in this conference. The U.S. has to have an A-bomb, and a front has to be in a B-29 space, i.e. close enough that it could hit Japan. And the Soviet Far East Front has to have made it to Manchuria or beyond. The Russians have to have declared war. Without all 3 of those conditions, the only way to make Japan surrender is to take them out. Okay. Then you determine what happens. The conference card is removed from the game after the campaign. If Germany or Japan have both surrendered, the game ends. If it was the 10th conference, the game ends. Otherwise, you start over with another card. And there's a lot more rules. This is only 17 pages, right? Well, some of it's the scenarios. There's a training one that's very small. There's the campaign, or their tournament scenario, and then there's the full campaign, which is, of course, what we're going to do. Now, there are, of course, variants to to any game. There's one that applies. There's two variants. One is the solo game. I'm not going to even go into the rules of that. There's people who are playing with them. I know Mark Herman has shown how to use them. I'm not planning on playing with them at this point. Maybe at some point in my life I will. People have already played out playthroughs using the solo. I don't want to do that. I'm curious of how this solos as a full game, because having played it at Consim World, I was kind of on the fence, because as Robert Stites mentioned, he's over on the Game Box and used to be at BGG sometimes. One of us expates, as he mentioned it, commenting on it, he thinks there's too much poker in the conference table. I think I can get as good a game as the game that I sat down, from my point of view, as the game that I played with Mark and his family. Just because, and we were playing with 4 people because Mark was kind of running it, but then somebody had to leave and he took a seat in it. Just because I didn't really know what I was doing. And that's really kind of my exploration on a first game. The game certainly will lose something without, with the, who's hoarding their cards? What are they doing? Are they going to throw their big bid in later? What's going to happen? Which issue do they really care about? That may not be apparent. Somebody else may have put the issue they care about in the table at the beginning. So all of that stuff, I'm kind of worried might not carry over terribly well. But, honestly, I play Diplomacy Solitaire, and I figure out a way of getting enjoyment out of it. It ain't the same game, and I don't think this will be the same game, but I think I'll get a certain level of enjoyment out of it. And when I play Triumph and Tragedy, which is also a game with a lot of, bluffing going on in it, I think, honestly, I figured, if I can enjoy that and play it, and I didn't realize how big that was going to be in terms of the bluffing aspect, I can do this. So that's where I went. Anyway, on to the one variant, and I haven't decided yet. Secret agendas. There's these counters, I'll put them in a cup, that have territories. There's 36 of them. Each player gets 3 at random. This is to shake up the victory point situation. At the end of the game, if you have a political alignment marker in one of your secret agenda markers, you get 5 victory points for that. So you don't know. There's already a die roll bit of randomness in the final game. But with this, you've got some goals to aim for that you don't know what the other players are going. And 5 victory points is a lot, okay? Winning a conference is worth 3 or 5 for the USSR. So a 5 victory point swing for holding one of these is a fairly big chunk. Remember, 15 points is the difference of, whether or not somebody ends up winning outright if they're within 15 points, and some chance that they might not win, assuming that you can defeat Japan and Germany. I think putting this shake-up in will help my solo experience. I also think that it'll help prevent people from trying too hard to game the I can probably come in second and boot the other guy down, which sounds really easy to me. The only problem with that, of course, was I was so focused on that and because I didn't realize that I allowed the Germans and that I was one of the people participating in a world where we didn't get an unconditional surrender. What about the victory points themselves? Let's take a look. So your political alignment marker is already worth 3 points for each country or colony that you have a marker in. You get 1 point for any place where you have a clandestine network, and I think I don't think it's per clandestine network. I think it's where you just have one. That there's not a control marker. You get 5 points if a global issue is in your favor for each one. You get 3 points, well, you get the 3 or 5 points for the conferences that you've won. The UK gets 2 victory points for any colony space with no clandestine network or political alignment marker. That leads me to wonder if clandestine networks should be cumulative. Nah, I don't think so. If your front made it into Germany or Japan, that's worth 8 victory points. And then we have lesser victory points, and I believe these are not cumulative. I wish I had it there. There we go. Yeah. So you get the furthest you've gone along the track. So if I'm to here, I get nothing. But if I get to here, I get 2 victory points. If I get to here, it's worth 5. If I get to here, it's worth 8. It's wherever you're ended. And that's important because there are points. The points are all kind of back-ended. You don't get little intermediate points in the way or anything. Italy is kind of weird. If the UK can get Italy up to central Italy here, they get a 2-point bonus victory points just for making it that far. So that's kind of cool. I don't know if there are any others kicking around somewhere. I don't see any. And then the A-bomb, the Russians get 3 points for each space that they made on the A-bomb track. Except for the first one. The USS and UK get 3 points if the A-bomb is created. And the USSR gets 3 points if the US has not made it here. If they failed to get to the Trinity space. That's pretty much it. So I do believe I'm going to use the strategic marker, strategic surprise, secret agenda. That's what it is. That reminds me of the computer game Hidden Agenda. We'll give this a shot. In order to set up the deck, I've got to basically shuffle each set of 3. Each conference has basically 3 choices, and I'll be randomizing which one goes in and not looking too carefully, and then that deck goes somewhere. And I also have to figure out what the hell I'm doing with these, because there don't seem to be any victory point markers for that. Which is weird. Very weird. All right.